So, with us being removed about a month from the NBA season, I thought it'd be a good time to finally put out my player rankings list. Every year after each season, I make my top 50 NBA players, but it would take way too much time on YouTube for me to do 50. So, I ended up going with the top 25 players. And I think I have a bit of a unique criteria for this list because usually when people make their lists where they rank the players, they usually go off of last season. That's not exactly how I rank the players when I do it. So keep that in mind. This is simply heading into next year. If I'm trying to win a championship for one season, what player do I want the most? So I ranked it that way. Just looking at these players in terms of their talent, I tried to take out injury. I tried to take out, off the court drama, any of the stuff outside of just them actually playing basketball. I kind of didn't factor into this. This is simply just ranking them based on their talent at this point in time. I think it's a better way to rank it because if you base it off of just one particular season, like half the stars are injured. Like this year, Dame was hurt for a while, AD was hurt, LeBron missed time, Kawhi and Paul George missed time, Ja was suspended, like Zion was hurt. So I think it's just very difficult to base it off of one season because you usually have a good chunk of the better players injured. So keep that in mind with this list. So let's get into it here. We're going to be doing 25 through 11 today, and then we'll be doing the top 10 either later today or tomorrow. So let's get into the list. All right, so coming in at 25, we do have Kyrie Irving of the Mavericks. So Kyrie is obviously a very mixed bag, and like I said, I'm trying to not factor in off-the-court stuff. We know he was a big reason for Brooklyn kind of blowing up, and I do find it very interesting that the Mavericks were the 4th seed when they traded for Kyrie, and they finished as the 11th or 12th seed after him and Luka played together. I don't think it's fair to put all that on Kyrie. The team obviously made a drastic change. I still don't know if Jason Kidd is the perfect fit, especially with the construction of this roster. But Kyrie individually, we still know he's one of the best players in the league. I mean, his offensive ability is still top-notch. He's live to go get 40 any night. We know he struggles on the defensive side of the ball, but if you've listened to my rankings in the past, I don't really knock guards for their lack of defense because, there's very few point guards out there that are good at defense. So I don't knock star point guards for not playing defense. It's not really expected of them anymore. But Kyrie's still one of the best ball handlers in the league, arguably best of all time at that. And I am very optimistic for the Mavs. I think they're going to be a lot better now that they're going to have Kyrie fully ingrained in this offense. So he'll probably be higher next year just because I'm expecting the Mavericks to have more regular season success. So he's here at 25. In at 24, ironically enough, we have the guy who used to play with Luka, Jalen Brunson. And I admit I might be higher on Jalen Brunson than some other people, but I really just love Jalen Brunson's mentality. He's a very good leader for his age. It seems like a lot of the Villanova products are like that. They're more adults. They're more mature, especially him. He stayed all 4 years at college, so I like that a lot. He's the best player on the Knicks. I mean, I love Julius Randle, but at this point, I think Brunson's just better. He's the better team leader and led them to be the 5 seed this year and win a playoff series. When Julius Randle was the leader of the team, they lost in the first round to Atlanta back in 21. So I think Brunson, he's huge for the Knicks. And at the time, I will admit, I didn't really care for the signing. I thought that it was a lot for Jalen Brunson. Like, he had a nice run in the playoffs last year against the Jazz, but I didn't really see why he was getting, I think, $25 or $27 million per year. I was like, that's a lot of money for Jalen Brunson, but he really proved it. I think he was the best player to not make the All-Star team this year. He should be an All-Star next year. He's an absolute just playmaker, great leader, great floor general, and plays really good defense for a point guard. So I have him here at 24. Coming in at 23, we have Anthony Edwards, and I'm now willing to admit that he is the best player on the Timberwolves. I was trying to push back on it for, the past 2 seasons, especially after last year. A lot of people were rushing to say Ant was the best player on the T-Wolves. I was still kind of sticking with Cat, but after this season, I think it's undeniable that he is their best player. 24.6 points per game on really good efficiency, and he plays really good perimeter defense. So, this type of player is always going to be extremely valuable in the NBA. A guy who can get you 30 on any given night and can clamp up the other team's best player. So, Anthony Edwards, he's only going to go up in value as time goes on. He's only in this is his second season or third season, I can't remember, but he's obviously very young. He's only going to get better with time, and he just inked a max contract with the Timberwolves. So, I'm always excited to see where the young players develop, and he's definitely one of the more energetic players around the league. So he's only going to go up as the years go on. Coming in at 22, we have Bam Adebayo, and when you talk about the ultimate versatile player, that is Bam Adebayo. I mean, he's the quintessential Swiss Army knife. Basically can do anything on the basketball court, and I tend to really like these versatile players, guys that can kind of do it all. And especially on the defensive side of the ball, Bam Adebayo can guard 1 through 5. I've seen him do it. And offensively, he's such an integral piece to the Heat offense. I mean, he does so much in terms of the playmaking ability, his pick and roll with either, Lowry or Jimmy Butler, his mid-range game, his post ability. The only thing I'd like to see Bam grow in, I think everyone who's a fan of Bam wants to see this, is his three-point shot. He just doesn't take threes. I don't really get it because he's a really effective mid-range shooter. So you would think if he's good at that, he should at least be taking threes. I mean, he doesn't have to be Steph Curry from behind the arc. We get that. But at least take them. Even Jimmy Butler was quoted as saying, telling Bam, take threes. But he just doesn't seem to do that. But outside of that, every part of his game is really good, and I just tend to, like I said, really like these versatile players. So, he was obviously a massive reason why they made it to the finals again. So, he's here at 22. In at 21, we have Trey Young. I feel like Trey Young has been kind of forgotten about this past season. And there was a point in time where people were starting to push Trey Young up into the top 10, obviously after their big conference finals run back in 2021. But after 2 disappointing seasons, it seems like his reputation is starting to take a hit. He's not really regarded as one of the better young players anymore. But I still think Trey Young is a phenomenal young player. He's still an offensive juggernaut on his own. You look back to last season, they were so dreadfully bad at defense. They were one of the worst defenses in the league. Obviously, he doesn't help that. But him basically on his own made them a top 5 offense and allowed them to be the 8th seed that year. And then this year, adding DeJounte, again, another disappointing season. I thought they'd be at least a top 5 seed. They ended up being the 7th seed and lost in the first round. I don't know exactly what the blueprint is for Atlanta going forward. They just brought in a new coach, Quinn Snyder. But Trey Young individually, I still think he's really good. Obviously, we know about the three-point shot ability. His ball handle is phenomenal. But the real thing, the unsung thing about Trey Young's game, is his playmaking ability is incredible. I mean, he's not really talked about as one of the better playmakers in the league, but he really is. You go look at his numbers, he's averaged basically 10 assists ever since he walked into the league. So I feel like that's a really undervalued part of his game because everyone wants to talk about his three-point ability, and we get it. It's exciting, but he really makes a lot of his teammates better. And I'm interested to see what John Collins is going to look like in Utah now that he is not playing with Trey Young anymore. So that'll be a fun watch. But Trey stays in the top 25 for me. In at 20, we have Paul George. And like I said at the beginning of the video, we're not taking in the injuries. I know it's been a big issue with Paul George the past 2 seasons. But the last time we saw Paul George fully healthy, he had an incredible playoff run back in 2021. After Kawhi got hurt against the 1-seeded Jazz, he willed them and was the leader of that team and led them to the conference final, the first conference final in Clippers history. So I know that the past 2 years have been rough with the injury. I think he played 30 games this year, and then the year prior, I can't even remember. But when Paul George stays healthy, he's one of the most effective players in the league on both sides of the ball. There's a reason why the Clippers gave up so much to get him. You go back and look at it now, it looks like a very lopsided trade with all the assets that OKC got out of the Paul George trade, specifically SGA. But at the time, it made a lot of sense because Paul George was worth that. That was his value on the market. And I think, it's obviously really hard with the injuries to expect much at this point in time for him and the Clippers as a whole. But if he could just stay healthy for one season, him and Kawhi, we haven't seen it since the bubble. They flamed out in the bubble. I would love to just see that duo stay healthy for one season because when they were brought together, they were one of the most hyped things ever. I was on the bandwagon for them. Not that I was rooting for them, but I thought they were going to win it. They were the favorite going into the bubble. And it's been an utter bust. Nothing, outside of that one conference finals run, this team has done literally nothing. So I'm hoping and praying. I think it's kind of naive at this point to hold out hope for that, but I'm hoping we eventually get to see this team healthy. But Paul, still one of the most effective players in the league due to his two-way ability, so I put him here at 20. Coming in at 19, we have Ja Morant, and like I said, we're not factoring in the off-the-court issues, so I'm not taking into account all the drama that's been around Ja. We're specifically talking about his play. And if you're just looking at his play, this might look low to some people because I've seen Ja Morant as high as 15 or 14 on some people's lists. And, I was really enamored with Ja early on, but there's been one thing that has kind of deterred me from really putting Ja higher than some other people, and that's his three-point shot is just not where I want it to be at this point in his career. I mean, it growed pretty substantially from year 1 to 2. 2 to 3 even took a pretty nice bump, but this year, really not a massive jump from the three-point shot. And this just really deters me because he's only really able to score one way, and that's driving to the basket. This isn't a knock on him. He's one of the most exciting players in the league. It's just I don't think he's quite as valuable as some other players in the league. Still really fun to watch, but I've seen him lay 2 back-to-back stinkers in the playoffs, back-to-back years. I mean, last year, he was good against the Timberwolves in round 1, but against the Warriors, I know he was injured for one of the games, but he was just not good in that series. And then this year against the Lakers was very ineffective. So, the shot needs to get better, and his last 2 playoff performances were just not that great for me. And at 18, we have James Harden. So speaking of bad playoff performances, despite my love of James Harden, I have to say he was pretty terrible in the last 2 playoff series. Now, last year, I think it was overstated. Obviously, Joel missed a lot of time, so I don't knock him as much for that one. But this year, I was extremely disappointed with Harden because he was missing, wide-open layups at the rim and all that. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but 18, I think, is fair for James. I know I'm pretty biased towards him. He's one of my 3 favorite players in the league, so I have a bias towards James Harden, I admit it. But at the same time, people are acting like he's washed. He led the league in assists. Back when Chris Paul used to lead the league in assists, he'd get into top 25s just for that alone while averaging 14 points. James Harden still averaged 22 this year on really good efficiency. And, a big thing that people forget is when James went to Philly, the narrative was basically James has to know that this is no longer his team. He has to play the backseat role to Joel Embiid. That's exactly what he did, and I feel like no one gave him credit for that. I feel like a lot of the casuals just saw his points per game average go from 35 in Houston and drop down to 22 or 23 in Philly, and they're like, oh, well, he's washed now. No, he's playing a very different role. If you put him on his own team, he could still, I think, average probably not 35, but he's obviously going to average more than 22. So that's annoying to me. I know he's not as explosive as he once was. He's not as consistent as he once was. He used to be an Iron Man, but he's still a really good player, and I'm sick of all the James Harden slander. He's definitely annoyed me. It's been a headache defending him as a James Harden fan, but I'm still going to stick by him. I think 18 is a very fair spot for him. Coming in at 17, we have DeAaron Fox, and DeAaron Fox was always really good in Sacramento. He was kind of under the radar because no one was watching Kings games, but this was obviously the big, massive come-out party for De'Aaron Fox. He was incredible this year, won the inaugural Clutch Player of the Year award, and rightfully so. I mean, he was literally unguardable in the clutch. He's still one of the fastest players in the league. His three-point shot has come a long way, and yeah, I'm glad for him now because It looked like for a long time he was just going to kind of waste away in Sacramento, but now it looks like the Kings have really turned things around. They just made the playoffs for the first time since 2006, and he just made his first All-Star team. So things are really trending upwards for the Kings and DeAaron Fox. I like to see it. He's just a nice, humble guy, so I'm rooting for him. And yeah, I think it's after this year, I think it's hard to argue that he's not better than Ja. Like, he was basically better than at Ja at everything on the court. I mean, Ja is probably the more known name, but I just think he had a much better season this year. He deserved to make All-NBA over Ja. Coming in at 16, we have Jalen Brown, one of the best two-way players in the league. He is one of the most versatile players in the league in terms of his offensive ability and defense. I mean, he's really good at perimeter defense. And yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely ludicrous that there's people out there saying that Boston should trade Jalen Brown, even for Dame. Like, I would not trade Jalen Brown for Damian Lillard. People forget the fact of how young him and Tatum are. Like, you could keep this duo together for the next 8 years, and you can't tell me they're not going to at least get one championship out of it. I mean, they've already made a finals. They've already made, 4 conference finals, and they're 26 and 25 years old, something like that. So, I'm really sick of seeing the Jalen Brown trade rumors. I know he is. He's even commented on how sick of it he is. But he is a phenomenal two-way player. Definitely reminds me of more of that Paul George mold. He's definitely not as polished on offense as Paul George is right now. But, he's a great defender. And I just think, he's the perfect complementary piece because he's not a 1. But I think he's about as good a number 2 as you can have, and that's why I think Boston would be very foolish to trade him away. All right, so coming in at 15, we have Donovan Mitchell. And this is another one where I might have some bias because I've been a massive fan of his since his rookie year. But I think 15 is actually a really fair spot for him. I mean, on his own, he is just an offensive juggernaut at 6'3". If you add 2 or 3 inches to his game, he'd be a top 10 player easily in the league. I mean, his explosiveness on offense, his ball handle, and even this year we saw him play some point guard towards the beginning of the year. When Darius Garland was out, he played point guard and showed that he could really thrive in that role. And he's definitely a guy known around the league who elevates his game during the playoffs. Now, I know that the Cavs definitely underperformed in the playoffs this year, but that was not to the fault of Donovan Mitchell. You go back and look at those games, Donovan was basically doing everything on his own. His team didn't really put much up around him. But, I don't really fault that because the Cavs are still a really young team. But, Donovan, I think he is one of the best guards in the league, clearly. I just love his ability to take over games. I think he's an extremely clutch player, has no fear. He's just a stud. So I have him here at 15. In at 14, we have Kawhi Leonard. Now, I know at the beginning of the video I said that I'm not taking injuries into account, but with Kawhi, it's basically impossible to not even talk about it because last year he didn't play a single game. This year he played, 30 games and then got hurt in the playoffs anyways. So that load management goes right out the window right there because your whole point of resting him and being overly cautious with his injuries is so he's available for the playoffs. And look what happened whenever the playoffs were around. He got hurt anyways. So that load management is a big load of BS. So I'm really sick of that with the Clippers overall. But Kawhi individually, still a great player, still has very high upside when he plays. He's not the defensive player he once was. So if anyone still views Kawhi as an elite defender, I think those days are long gone. I think in spurts, he can be a really good defender when he tries, in playoff games. The last real defensive standout I think he had was back in 2021 against the Mavericks. I mean, he was playing really good defense on Luka in the clutch in the fourth. But as an overall defender, he just doesn't have the consistency anymore. He's definitely shifted his game to much more of the offensive side of the ball when he plays. But, yeah, I mean, I think that at this point, this is what Kawhi is. And I know I said I'm not factoring in injuries and all that, but with Kawhi, it's basically impossible to not factor that in. I mean, because it's so outrageous. It's so over the top with how many games he takes off and all that. So maybe it did factor in a little here with Kawhi, but I still have him as the 14th best player in the world. So that's still really good. I just wish he could play more. In at 13, we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And about 2 years ago, I made a list where I had SGA over Ja Morant, and I got absolutely clowned by people for that. Now, it wasn't on this channel. It was on a different channel, but I remember I got pretty much harassed for that. And I feel pretty vindicated now. I mean, I think there's no one out there who would say Ja's better than SGA at this point in time. I mean, he just made All-NBA first team. He's an absolute just offensive mastermind. I mean, he reminds me of Kyrie with just his, smooth ball handling ability. And just Kyrie with 3 or 4 more inches, because I think Kyrie's 6'1", and then SGA I think is 6'5" or 6'6". So having that height at the point guard ability is crucial. His playmaking ability is fantastic. His handling is insane, and he's not even the best defender in the world. It's just the fact that he's tall for the position. It gives him obviously an advantage on that side of the ball. So, like I said, I feel pretty vindicated him being on first all-team or All-NBA first team this year. Next year, I really, really hope to see the Thunder in the playoffs. Chet's going to be back. I think they're going to be a really interesting team. But individually, he's incredible. Just averaged like 31 a game. We know he's great. Coming in at number 12, we have Anthony Davis. And some people might think this is low since I'm not factoring in the injuries. But even when you take the injuries out, it feels like AD kind of takes 1 out of 3 games off where he's just not as aggressive. He's settling for jump shots instead of being more aggressive and attacking the rim. All that being said, though, when Anthony Davis is healthy, he's one of the most impactful players to play the game. Specifically defensively, he's an absolute monster on that side of the ball. And when he gets going offensively, I mean, whenever he puts his shoulder down, just attacks the basket, he's one of the most unguardable players in the league. Can also stretch the court a little. He's not a knockdown shooter, but you also can't just leave him open. So, in all things being said, Anthony Davis should be a top 5 player in the world. I mean, he has the talent to be that. It's just his lack of drive at times really, I think, holds him back. He settles a lot. He doesn't like to play the center position because he doesn't like to play more physical. That's why he always likes to play the 4. And I get that, That's what he wants to do. That's his call. But he has all the tools in the world to be a top 5 player, even, potentially the best player in the world if he wanted to be, if he could stay healthy. He's an absolute monster. But for the things I said, he doesn't quite get into my top 10. And coming in at number 11, the final spot for today's video, we have Devin Booker. Devin Booker is literally, when you're talking about just pure bucket getters, Devin Booker is that. I mean, the playoff run alone he went on this year was insane. I know that they lost in the second round, but he went on a historic scoring run, especially in the first round, just against the Clippers. He could not miss. I mean, his efficiency was disgusting. He's liable to get 50 any night. He's one of those players who can just score from everywhere. His ball handling is fantastic. His playmaking ability has definitely improved. We've seen in small spurts him play point guard. I don't really love the idea of him playing point guard for an entire season, like they're saying now after the Beal trade. They're saying that Devin Booker is probably going to start at point guard. I don't love that long term, but we've seen him in spurts play pretty well at point guard. People know Devin Booker can shoot the ball, but I contend that he's a top 5 shooter in the league. That's just how good he is. For the volume of shots he takes, for his ability to make it really from any range outside the arc, he's just the absolute polished offensive player. And he's grown defensively. He used to be a terrible defender. Now, I'd say he's a pretty league average defender. He's respectable on that side of the ball, but obviously his offense is what he's known for. But that has been my 25 through 11 rankings. Like I said, either later today or tomorrow, I'll be putting out the top 10. So stay tuned for that. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of the list. Let me know how I did terribly wrong with the rankings. So if you made it this far, appreciate it. Please leave a like and subscribe.